Good morning and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. I am Joshua Pearsall, and today we are discussing Article 6 of Jacob Arminius' defense. Let's get into it. So if you're new here, got some headphones here. I will play some nice background music for myself. If you're new to us working through Jacob Arminius' complete works and his writings, I advise everyone, if this helps you, if this distracts you, don't do this. Get some headphones or something and just play some wordless music in the background. That helps me personally. Just gives some basically like white noise in the background. But we've been working through for a long time the writings of Jacob Arminius, and two important questions for you guys, the viewers here, before we get into this. If you've been a long-time viewer especially, I release these in parts for those of you who are newer. So today's Article 6, the last video we did was Article 4 and 5. Would you prefer I simply record the entire reading of, well, I guess now what's left of the articles and then put it out as one video? Or would you rather continue to do it in parts? In this series, unlike some of our other ones, I don't add in commentary here. I'm just reading through Jacob Arminius' works because it's in the public domain, and it lets it just be open for everyone here to read, learn, and gain from Arminius without necessarily outside commentary where it's not necessary. So if you prefer, I can put them out as one big video. That will help me put them out a little bit quicker, even though the videos won't come out quite as often, because we will be switching to one video a week on normal circumstances moving forward soonish, just because of how much work I have going on in the background. So this would sort of help make that a little bit easier, because I could just record these and then when I'm done, put them together into one big video. So let me know what you think about that. Or if you'd rather, I can still release them in parts. They just won't be as frequent as previously. Just let me know in the comments. And now we'll get into this. This will be linked down in the doobly-doo below. So if you want to follow along reading it, or if you just want to listen, that's fine as well. But if you want to follow along reading it, you can do so at your own pace there in that link. So Article 6 is all things are done contingently. This is Jacob Arminius' articles of defense for himself against a myriad of false accusations, for anyone who doesn't know what these are. This article is expressed in such a stupid and senseless manner that they who attribute it to me declare by this very circumstance that they do not perceive under how many falsities this expression labors. Nay, they do not understand what is the meaning of the words which they employ. For it is, if that is said to be done contingently, which is possible not to do, or that which may not be done, after all the causes required for its being done have been fixed, and on the other hand, if that is said to be done necessarily, which cannot be left undone, which cannot but be done, after all the causes required for its performance have been fixed, and if I grant that, after some causes have been fixed, it is impossible for any other event to ensue than that thing should be done and exist. How then can I be of the opinion that all things are done or happen contingently? But they have deceived themselves by their own ignorance, from that which it would be possible for them to be liberated. If they would bestow a becoming and proper attention on sentiments that are more correct, and would in a friendly manner obtain from the author a knowledge of his views and opinions. I have both declared and taught that necessity, in reference to its being said or to happen necessarily, is either absolute or relative. It is an absolute necessity in relation to a thing being said simply, or to be or to happen necessarily, without any regard being had to the supposition or laying down of any cause whatever. It is a relative necessity when a thing is said to be or to happen necessarily, after some cause had been laid down or fixed. Thus God exists by an absolute necessity, and by the same absolute necessity he both understands and loves himself. But the world and all things produced from it are, according to an absolute consideration, contingent and produced contingently by God, freely operating, but it being granted that God wills to form the world by his infinite power, to which nothing itself must be equal to matter in the most perfect state of preparation. And it being likewise that God actually employs this power, it will be then said it was impossible for the world to do otherwise than exist from this cause. Or from this cause, the world could not but exist. And this is a relative necessity, which is so called from the hypothesis of an antecedent cause being laid down or fixed. I will explain my meaning in a different manner. Two things in this place come under our consideration: the cause and effect. If both of them be necessarily fixed, that is, if not only the effect be fixed necessarily when the cause fixed, but if the cause also necessarily exist and be necessarily supposed to operate, the necessity of the effect is in that case simple and absolute. In this manner arises the absolute necessity of the divine effect, by which God is said to know and love himself. For the divine understanding and the divine will cannot be inoperative. They cannot but operate. This operation of God is not only an internal one, but it is also ad intra, or inwards, tending towards an object, which is himself. But whatever God may do ad extra, or externally, that is when acting on an object which is something beside himself, or something different from himself. Whether this object be united to him in understanding, and he tend towards it by an internal act, or whether it be in reality separated from him, and towards which he tends by an external act, the whole of this he does freely, and the whole of it is thereof said to be absolutely contingent. Thus God freely decreed to form the world, and did freely form it. And in this sense, all things are done contingently in respect to the divine decree, because no necessity exists why the decree of God should be appointed, since it proceeds from his own pure and free or unconstrained will. Or, to express it in another form, this is called the simple and absolute necessity of any effect. When the cause necessarily exists, necessarily operates, and employs that power through which it is impossible for the thing not to exist, or through which it cannot but exist. In the nature of things, in such an effect as this cannot be contemplated. For the intellect of the deity, by which he understands himself, proceeds from a cause that necessarily exists and that necessarily understands itself. But it does not proceed from a cause which employs a power of action for such an understanding. Under this consideration, the relative necessity of any event is twofold. First, when a cause that necessarily exists, but does not necessarily operate, uses a power of action that cannot be resisted. Thus it being fixed that God, who is a necessary being, wills to create a world by his omnipotence. A world must in that case necessarily come into existence. Secondly, when a cause that does not necessarily exist and yet necessarily operates acts with such efficacy as is impossible to be resisted by the matter or subject on which it operates. Thus straw is said to be necessarily burnt or consumed by the fire, if it be cast into the flame, because it is impossible either for the fire to restrain its power of burning so as not actually to burn, or for the straw to resist the fire. But because God can prevent the fire from burning any combustible matter that is brought near it or put into it, this kind of necessity is called partial in respect to the cause, and only according to the nature of things themselves and the mutual affection or relation between them. When these matters have been thus explained, I could wish to see what can possibly be said in opposition. I am desirous that we should in preference contend for the necessity of God alone, that is, for his necessary existence and for the necessary production of his internal acts, and that we should contend for the contingency of all other things and effects. Such a procedure on our part would conduce far more to the glory of God, to whom by this method would be attributed both the glory of his necessary existence, that is, of which his eternity, according to which it is a pure act without the exercise of power, and the glory of his free creation of all other things, by which also his goodness becomes a supreme object of our commendation. I understand if you're new to philosophical language how some of that's going to be very heady. if you need help, feel free to ask in the comments, trying to understand some of these things. Google. I realize I say Google it to some people a fair amount of time, but Google is a resource. It doesn't mean that everything you find is going to be correct on the first notch, but this is just classic scholastic philosophical language from Arminius. This is pretty standard. So if you just find like a standard philosophical, I don't know, dictionary or textbook or article from some of the philosophical institutions, then it's going to be pretty on point here. There's not going to be much craziness that you're finding in what's being said here. It does make you wonder, like, if this is something that he was accused of, all things are done constantly. The consequence of this would be that God is not necessary. That would be the consequence of this statement. I don't know who thought Arminius ever said anything like this, but this kind of goes to show some of the outlandish things that were thrown at him in how rabid some people were in trying to attack him. But that's it for this today. I know this is a bit shorter than our normal one. I just am tight on time. To anyone who doesn't know, I'm a full-time student, full-time employee, do a fair amount of ministry work, and I do have summer class. I will have one for school and then another class related to ministry work that's going on as well. So a very full plate and a lot going on. So some of the stuff, that's why we're switching to one video. Things are just tighter on time, and we'll see how all that will work out. All by God's grace. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.